I used to think love was enough, that if I supported him, celebrated his wins, and shared every part of myself, that would be enough to keep us together. Ethan and I met at the firm 5 years ago. He was charming, confident in a room full of executives, and always knew the right thing to say. I admired that. We clicked instantly. Colleagues turned lovers, then husband and wife. Back then, we were equals. At least, I thought we were. But as I climbed, leading complex projects, getting invited into board meetings, earning quiet nods from higher-ups, Ethan shifted. He'd say things like, "You're always working late," or "Must be nice being everyone's favorite." I thought it was stress. I thought he'd catch up. I didn't see the resentment growing in his eyes every time someone congratulated me. And then came Lena, a fresh-faced assistant he insisted on hiring. She was eager, always giggling at his jokes, calling him "sir," even when no one asked her to. I had a feeling, but I buried it, because love should come with trust, right? Until that night, I opened the office door and saw them, his lips on hers. My world split in two. He didn't flinch. He didn't pull away or act ashamed. He looked at me like I was the problem. "You made everything about your career," he said. Like that explained it. She made me feel like a man. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I stood there as Lena covered herself awkwardly, eyes wide, as if I was intruding. It felt like time stopped. All the nights I stayed up reviewing his presentations, covering for his missed deadlines, reassuring him when his name didn't make the credits. I remembered all of it, and it meant nothing now. He chose her because she let him feel superior, because I refused to shrink. I didn't pack a bag or slam a door. I just walked out, quietly, with my pride still intact, even if my heart was bleeding. I turned in my resignation the next morning. No explanations, no theatrics. People whispered, stunned. I was the firm's rising star. Ethan played the concerned husband well. She just needed space, he told them. They believed him. He thought I'd fall apart, that I'd disappear, humiliated and forgotten. I didn't argue. I just left, not to crumble, but to begin again, on my own terms, in silence. I moved out of our apartment by the end of the week. No ceremony, just a silent van, a few boxes, and a note left on the counter. "You made your choice. Now I'm making mine." I didn't speak to anyone from the firm. I let them draw their own conclusions. Ethan's narrative likely made me sound fragile or unstable. I didn't care. The truth didn't need defending. I wasn't broken. I was done. I rented a small place outside the city, the kind where the windows didn't shut properly and the heater complained every morning. But it was mine. No shared furniture. No echo of his laughter. I started freelancing, small tech startups needing guidance, young teams looking for structure. I stayed off social media, ignored industry updates, and refused every offer that tried to lure me back into visibility. People forgot me. That was the plan. Let them forget. While I rebuilt quietly, fiercely, every late night became a lesson. Every rejection became fuel. I enrolled in leadership intensives, flew to conferences under an alias, and took notes like I was starting from scratch. Because I was, not to return, but to rise. So high that no one would see me coming. A year passed, and in that time, I became someone I barely recognized. Sharper, grounded, unbothered by praise or scorn. My consulting work flourished. I turned fledgling projects into scalable platforms. I trained founders in strategy and conflict management. I listened more than I spoke. That year taught me what the firm never could. Power doesn't shout. It listens, observes, and strikes only when necessary. One cold morning, an email arrived from a recruiter, a competitor firm, much larger than our old company, was hiring for a senior leadership role. Their tech division was struggling. They needed a strong hand. I almost declined, but something tugged at me. The job was a level above my last role. The salary was triple, and the location? One floor above, where Ethan and Lena now worked. I smiled for the first time in months, not because I wanted revenge, but because I was ready. I walked into the skyscraper lobby that Monday in a tailored navy suit, heels clicking like a metronome. My ID badge read Director of Technology Initiatives. The receptionist smiled. "Welcome to your new office, Ms. Sharif." I walked in. The game hadn't just changed. I was the new rulebook. The moment I stepped onto the floor, I felt their energy shift. Ethan looked up first. His coffee cup hovered in midair as his smile dropped. Lena stood frozen near the printer, her jaw slack. I didn't react. No raised eyebrow. No acknowledgement. I walked past them like they were scenery. My office had glass walls and a view of the skyline. Within the hour, I'd called a department-wide meeting. I introduced myself as the new division head, laid out expectations, and emphasized a culture of accountability and collaboration. My voice was calm, precise. I didn't flinch when I saw Lena's wide eyes darting toward Ethan for reassurance. I didn't blink when Ethan cleared his throat and said, "It's nice to see you again." I just nodded and turned to the agenda. Let them stew. Let them wonder. I wasn't here to address the past. I was here to lead. By the end of the day, I'd reassigned team leads, removed unnecessary bottlenecks, and started reviewing all past project metrics. I treated Ethan and Lena like everyone else, but slightly more exacting. Not because I was petty, but because they had earned no benefit of the doubt. This wasn't vengeance. This was structure. Meetings came and went. Deadlines approached. And under my direction, the chaos began to settle. But Ethan struggled. He was used to charm carrying him, but charm didn't translate in task reports. Lena, too, faltered. She wasn't incompetent, just unprepared. Her promotion had been a gift from a man who needed validation, not a reward for merit. She made careless errors, confused file versions, missed important follow-ups, forgot to notify team leads. I gave her feedback in private, professional, direct, no cruelty, just expectations. She nodded, flustered, promising to improve. Ethan started staying later, leaving notes on my desk. Maybe we rushed into things. You always brought out the best in me. Lena and it's complicated. I didn't respond. I didn't even look at the notes. I handed them back during team reviews like misplaced memos. It drove him mad, being ignored. But I wasn't playing anymore. This wasn't about emotional chess. I'd spent a year becoming a woman who didn't need to prove anything. Let him twist in his regrets. Let her feel the weight of a job she wasn't built for. I didn't raise my voice. I just raised the bar. And every time they failed to meet it, the silence spoke for me. The whispers started 2 weeks in. Not about me, but about Ethan and Lena. They're struggling under her. She's not playing favorites. Did you see how she corrected Ethan in front of the whole team? I didn't entertain gossip, but I allowed the performance to speak. Lena missed an important security update on a rollout twice. The result was a critical delay. I called her into my office, handed her a printout. and said, "Walk me through how this happened." Her voice shook, excuses ready. I listened, nodded, and said, "Effective tomorrow, you're being reassigned to operations support. You need structure before responsibility." No malice, just a decision. She left in tears. Ethan barged in an hour later. "You embarrassed her. That's not leadership." I met his eyes for the first time since returning. Leadership isn't coddling. It's clarity. He didn't argue again. Instead, he sulked through meetings, offering half-formed suggestions and passive digs. I never responded, not because I didn't notice, but because he was already beneath the conversation. Upper management, however, noticed me. "You've cleaned up a lot in a short time," the VP said after a department review. I simply replied, "Standards are transformative." He smiled. "We need more of that." The invitations followed quickly. Internal roundtables, strategic leadership panels, Q&A forums with board members. I didn't push for visibility. It found me. While Ethan tried to reclaim relevance through whispers and back-channel chats, I was already seated at bigger tables. I remember one Friday when Lena approached my office hesitantly. She held a document I'd already reviewed and corrected. "I just wanted to say, I didn't know what I was doing before." She whispered, "I thought I was helping him. I didn't realize I was hurting you too." I looked at her for a long moment. There was no apology that could restore what she took, but I also saw no reason to be cruel. "You were both chasing things you didn't understand," I said evenly. "Now you'll learn." She nodded, blinking back tears. There was no pride in her anymore, just someone learning the hard way. I didn't offer comfort. Growth begins when delusion dies. That weekend, I received confirmation. I was being considered for executive director. The only candidate. Ethan caught wind of it by Monday. He stopped by during lunch break, holding 2 coffees. "I miss talking to you," he said, as if that bridge still existed. "Then talk to yourself," I replied. Ethan tried harder after that. Small compliments. "Your team is doing great. You're really in your element." I never told him to stop, but I never offered a return. Let him feel the space he created. Meanwhile, I invited junior female employees for weekly mentorship chats. I told them about imposter syndrome, about being overlooked, and about never lowering their standards to earn affection. They didn't know my full story. Not yet, but I could see it in their eyes. They understood pieces. One of them, Noura, reminded me of myself years ago. Sharp, ambitious, but too eager to be liked. I gave her harder assignments. She exceeded every one. Quietly, I was building something beyond revenge. A legacy. That Wednesday, I received an email from corporate communications. "We're doing a series on leadership journeys. Would you be willing to share yours?" I stared at the screen for a long while. My fingers hovered. Then I typed, "Yes, but only if I write it myself." The next week, a company-wide newsletter featured my essay, From Replacement to Rebuild, What Losing Everything Taught Me About Real Power. I didn't name names. I didn't need to. Ethan read it 3 times. I know, because he printed it. After the article, things changed fast. Senior staff began consulting me before major initiatives. I was asked to co-lead a regional expansion. I found myself at dinner tables with CEOs and founders who wanted to hear how I kept calm during organizational storms. Ethan, meanwhile, had been reassigned to a mid-tier analytics team. It wasn't demotion, it was dilution, his relevance fading. Lena transferred to HR logistics quietly. She sent me a short email the day before. "Thank you for making me grow. I'll do better from now on. I replied, good luck. That was all. There was nothing else to say. One night after a company gala, Ethan waited by the car park. Do you ever think we could have worked if I hadn't? He didn't finish. I turned to him. For the first time, I didn't feel pain. You mistook my ambition for abandonment, but I was never yours to shrink. He opened his mouth to speak, but I walked away before he could. That moment wasn't for him. It was for me, to reclaim silence, to prove I didn't need to win an argument. I'd already won the war, not by force, but by never falling to their level. 3 months into my new role, the department transformed. What had once been a chaotic floor of shifting responsibilities and invisible accountability was now a streamlined, high-output machine. Upper management praised our data flow, product cycle improvements, and morale, all within a quarter. But not everyone was thriving. Ethan was losing his grip. The team stopped deferring to him. His ideas were outdated, lacking the innovation we demanded now. I never rejected them directly. I simply asked sharper questions. How does this solve the user friction in Phase 3? He blinked, unsure. Lena, in her new logistical role, tried to remain invisible. I let her. My energy wasn't in correcting the past. It was in building the future. I brought in 2 women I'd mentored the previous year, now senior managers. Their presence shifted the energy further. Ethan grew quieter. One afternoon, I found a note in my office drawer. It was Ethan's handwriting. If I hadn't been so insecure, maybe I would have deserved you. I closed it, placed it in my desk's bottom drawer, and never spoke of it again. That was the difference between us. He chased validation. I chased growth. One vanished when ignored. The other turned invisible into influence. Promotion reviews arrived sooner than expected. I was called into a director's meeting, asked to present a 3-year roadmap for departmental expansion. My vision was simple: mentor from within, elevate based on skill, and embed agility into every project. They approved it unanimously. I walked out knowing my promotion to executive director was unofficially confirmed. That same week, I found Ethan waiting outside the office again, holding 2 coffees. One's black, just how you used to like it, he said, almost nervously. I looked at the cup, then at him. What do you want? I just miss being someone who mattered to you. There was honesty in his voice, but not clarity. He wanted to feel important again. That wasn't love. That was ego clawing at comfort. I shook my head. I gave you space to rise beside me. You chose to crawl beneath someone who worshipped your weaknesses. He blinked, stunned. I walked back inside. The elevator closed, and I saw his reflection in the glass, standing alone, coffee cooling in his hand, wearing the suit I once bought for his first promotion. Some things don't need destruction. They fall apart all on their own when the foundation is hollow. The story I wrote for the company newsletter kept spreading. Internal forums reposted it. Teams I'd never met before forwarded thank yous. A few junior engineers told me it gave them the courage to apply for roles they never imagined they deserved. I realized then what I went through wasn't just personal. It was structural. Women like me were often told to pick love or ambition, to slow down so fragile egos could keep up. But no one wins when power is negotiated through silence. At the next leadership summit, they asked if I'd be willing to tell my story publicly this time. I said yes, but I didn't write a script. I stood on stage in a white power suit, the same color as the one I wore the day I resigned from my old firm. I told them, they say some women are too much. I say some rooms are too small. When the applause came, it wasn't loud. It was lasting. That evening, I received a message from Lena. Just 3 words. I understand now. I didn't reply. Understanding comes late, and that's fine. I wasn't waiting for it. I'd moved beyond it. And by the end of Q2, I was officially named Executive Director of Strategic Development. My appointment came with a new office overlooking the entire city, the kind of view you only dream about when you start with nothing but doubt and drive. At the company-wide celebration, my name echoed through applause as I walked onto the stage. Ethan was there, seated in the back row, with his new team. Lena sat beside HR, clapping lightly. I thanked the CEO, then faced the audience. Some rebuild out of revenge. I rebuilt out of necessity. You don't need fire to rise. You need direction. That line made its way onto internal posters within days. Ethan never congratulated me. He didn't need to. I saw everything I needed in his eyes: regret, loss, and a flicker of shame he couldn't quite hide. But I didn't smile. I didn't smirk. I simply moved forward. That night, as I passed the hallway he once used to walk me to, he was standing there. I walked by without stopping. His body turned slightly, like he expected acknowledgement. I gave him none, because when you've outgrown the cage, you don't go back to rattle it. You soar in silence. Ethan's presence in the company faded faster than I anticipated, not because he was removed, but because he was simply no longer remarkable. People stopped including him in important discussions. He wasn't copied on the big emails. His ideas, when offered, were met with polite nods and then quickly replaced. I didn't orchestrate this. I didn't need to. The ecosystem corrected itself. In contrast, my calendar was booked out weeks in advance. Speaking engagements, innovation think tanks, internal mentorships. Yet I never stopped walking the floor. I still asked interns what they were working on, still corrected misaligned workflows myself. And that was the difference. I didn't lead from a pedestal. I led from proximity. One afternoon, during a weekly check-in, the VP leaned in and said, "You've created something rare here. A space where people don't need to fear excellence." That line stayed with me, because fear was how Ethan led. It's what he clung to when I began to rise. Now, he watched a culture bloom that no longer needed him. Once, I caught him standing outside my office during one of my mentorship circles. He didn't enter. He just stared, like a man watching a life that could have been his, if he hadn't blinked. Lena's journey, surprisingly, took a different turn. After months in HR logistics, she began to quietly excel. She started asking sharper questions, taking accountability, and guiding new hires with surprising patience. I noticed, though I said nothing, until one Friday, she asked if I had a moment. I said, yes. She closed the door behind her, hands clasped tightly in front of her. "I don't want forgiveness," she said immediately, "but I want to thank you. You didn't humiliate me. You didn't destroy me. You just showed me what real strength looks like." For a moment, I saw the young woman I once might have been friends with in another lifetime. Not naive, not vindictive, just lost in the wrong guidance. I nodded. "Keep doing the work. That's all that matters now." She smiled with quiet relief and left. That was the only real closure I needed. Not apologies, not redemption arcs, just growth. She wasn't my enemy anymore. She was a product of a culture that broke women down to please broken men. And she was finally climbing out of that. Not for Ethan, not for me, but for herself. That's how I knew she would make it. As I continued mentoring the next generation, I started opening up more during sessions, still carefully, still measured, but now with fragments of truth they could piece together. I never named Ethan or Lena, but they could sense the shape of the pain behind my examples. You may find that success doesn't threaten strangers. It threatens people you love. I once said, they'll tell you you've changed, when really you've just stopped shrinking. It resonated. I saw it in their eyes, especially the women. And more importantly, I saw how they carried it forward. Promotions followed. Cultural change spread. I wasn't a moment anymore. I was momentum. HR asked if I'd be willing to record a company podcast episode about leadership and adversity. I said yes. When it aired, even people outside the company shared it. You weren't bitter. One listener messaged. You were beyond it. That comment stuck, because they were right. I'd spent so long being labeled cold, overachiever, too focused, that I forgot those were projections, not truths. And now, I had finally become something none of them saw coming. Not feared, not even admired, but trusted. And that was the highest currency in any boardroom. There was one final moment that sealed everything. At the annual Global Town Hall, every division head was given 60 seconds on stage. Most used it to list metrics. I didn't. I walked to the microphone, paused, and said, I was replaced once by someone who didn't know the job but knew how to please. It broke me, but then I rebuilt. And now, I sign the evaluations of those who once dismissed me. The silence in the room was electric. Everyone knew. Everyone knew. Ethan sat stiff in the back. Lena, near the aisle, looked down with quiet dignity. And I looked straight ahead. Growth doesn't come from pain. I continued. It comes from what you do with it. That was it. I stepped back, handed the mic over, and left the stage to thunderous applause. Not because I'd won, but because I had nothing left to prove. That moment was my closure. No tears. No vindictive satisfaction. Just peace. The kind that doesn't need to be declared. Only lived. When I walked backstage, one of the interns whispered, "You're the reason I didn't quit last year." And just like that, I knew everything had been worth it. The weeks following the town hall were surreal. I received handwritten notes from interns, thank you emails from junior staff, even a call from a female executive in another region who said, "Your words freed me." I didn't expect the wave, but I accepted it with quiet responsibility. Meanwhile, Ethan grew smaller by the day. He still showed up, still dressed neatly, still smiled when spoken to, but he was no longer anyone's center of gravity. He had become what he once feared. Irrelevant. There was no dismissal, no confrontation, just the slow vanishing of someone whose value had been proximity, not principle. Lena remained. She worked hard. I started seeing her mentor others gently. Her voice grew more grounded, less performative. One afternoon, I passed the break room and heard her say, "We don't need to be liked. We need to be good." I paused for just a second, not to interrupt, just to acknowledge. She'd learned, not because I demanded it, but because life forced her to choose, adapt or disappear. That was the final echo of the woman who once replaced me. Now she was making space for others, quietly, the way real power often does, without spectacle, without apology. I was asked to co-lead the Global Innovation Summit in Dubai, a first for someone at my level. When I walked into the welcome reception, I was no longer the woman with something to prove. I was the woman people came to listen to. Ethan, I learned, had applied for a transfer shortly after the town hall. He wasn't denied, but he wasn't chosen either. I overheard someone say, "He peaked too soon." It didn't make me feel triumphant, just reflective. We had started at the same point, two bright sparks in a competitive firm. But I had evolved, and he had resisted. I couldn't fault him for that entirely, but I couldn't carry it for him either. I delivered a keynote at the summit titled Integrity Over Impressions. It ended with, "There's a difference between being feared and being followed. One vanishes when the title fades. The other remains even in silence." The standing ovation was humbling, but the greatest reward came later. A woman approached me in tears. I stayed in a toxic job for 5 years because I thought I had to. After today, I'm choosing myself. I smiled, not because she was leaving, but because she was finally arriving. When I returned from the summit, things fell into place effortlessly. My men's were stepping into their own power. Promotions were being decided based on merit, not networking circles. There was one afternoon when I walked through the office and saw Ethan packing up his desk. He didn't look sad, just tired. We locked eyes briefly. No hostility, no smirk, just the shared understanding that our story had ended long ago. He gave a small nod. I returned it. That was all. He left without drama. No goodbye speeches. No requests to talk. He just exited. And with him, the last thread tying me to that past finally dissolved. The story that began with betrayal had ended not with revenge, but release. I didn't announce it. I didn't post about it. I simply opened my calendar and focused on what was next. That was the best part of this whole journey, realizing you don't need an audience for your evolution. You just need honesty, consistency, and a refusal to be less than what you are. That day, I rewrote my bio. It no longer said, former wife of. It read, builder of systems and people, because that's what I had always been. He just never saw it. The company published a hardcover anthology titled Voices of Resilience. My story closed the final chapter. I chose not to use names, but I did describe the arc, rising, falling, and rising again. My final line read, I was once the woman no one believed could come back stronger. Now, I lead the very ones who underestimated me. Copies were sent to every division. It wasn't about ego. It was about legacy, a blueprint for others. At the release event, Lena stood near the coffee table, holding her copy with quiet pride. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. She had her journey now, and I had mine. Later that night, as I walked out into the cold air, I realized something strange. I no longer felt the urge to look back. Not at him, not at what was lost, only forward. Because rebirth doesn't mean redoing the past. It means walking a new road with old scars turned into strength. My story didn't end with heartbreak. It began there. And now, every room I entered wasn't to prove I belonged. It was to make space for others, just like me, who were ready to rise quietly, powerfully, without asking for permission. The annual leadership retreat was held in a mountain resort, quiet, expansive, surrounded by still lakes and clean air. I was asked to close the final session with a keynote on legacy. As I stepped onto the stage, I didn't carry notes. I carried memories. I wasn't born powerful. I said, I was made powerful by the moments that tried to undo me. And I thank those moments, not because they were kind, but because they were necessary. Silence followed, a weighty kind. A few heads nodded. Others looked down, reflective. I continued. Power built on ego collapses, but power built on truth that endures. I ended with a small smile and walked off stage into a standing ovation. I didn't cry. Not this time. I'd already cried when no one was watching. What people saw now was the result. A woman who no longer needed to defend her worth. That evening, I stood on a hill outside the resort, watching the sun dip behind the trees. And in that stillness, I whispered, "Thank you, Ethan, not for what he gave me, but for what he couldn't, because what he failed to protect, I learned to build alone, and it was stronger for it." 6 months later, Lena left the company. No scandal, no resignation email thread, just a quiet departure. Her desk cleared and her badge left on the table. She sent me a message. "I've been offered a leadership role at a nonprofit for young women entering tech. I think I'm ready to lead from what I've learned." I replied, "Then lead well." And that was that. She was no longer the girl who stole something to feel significant. She had finally become someone who earned her seat. As for Ethan, I heard he'd started his own consultancy, the kind that feeds off LinkedIn buzzwords and secondhand strategy. I didn't wish him ill, but I didn't wish him anything. He was just someone who had once been in my life. A name, a lesson, no more. Meanwhile, I continued building, not louder, but broader, deeper. I launched a women's accelerator. I published a book. I kept mentoring, because if your story ends with only your success, then it was never big enough. And as I stood one evening before another packed room, I knew this. I was no longer anyone's regret. I was her boss, and his worst one, the one who didn't have to destroy him. She simply outgrew him.